This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creators. When you log on to Skillshare.com, you will see a recommended list of featured Skillshare videos on topics like media marketing, creating YouTube thumbnails, logo design, leadership, and many more topics. A course that I am watching now is Productivity for Creators, Starting a Successful Side Hustle by Ali Abdal. Productivity for Creators is a great course to help anyone start earning money from their hobby. Productivity for Creators shares various strategies, tools, techniques that help manage your time and focus your attention. Skillshare courses are curated specifically for learning. There are no ad breaks, and new premium classes are always being added, and it's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. I have an even better deal for you. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership so you can enjoy your creativity. When you join, you can try one of Skillshare's new live classes. Experience real-time inspiration as you connect with popular teachers while watching and working alongside other members. Click the link in the description to start your creative journey today with Skillshare. Welcome to Australia Collins class, SSG. I'm Captain Jive Turkey. All right, our story begins in July 1978 when the Royal Navy Director of Submarine Policy decided, you know what? These old Oberons are falling apart. We need to get some plans to make some new submarines here and replace this old Oberon class. These are the requirements the director stated in his initial policy. The new submarines must be built in Australia. We're not buying other nations' submarines built in other nations and maintained over there. They're going to be built here at home and going to be ours, 100% indigenous. Must be supported by the Australian shipyards. And this is a big one because the current state of the Australian shipyards in 1978 could not build and maintain a submarine fleet. Must be equipped with advanced technology, and this is probably the vaguest of them all. What he means here is that they must have a long lifespan. So they must be built with technology from day one that will last for or create the environment for a longer life period. And by his long lifespan, he means greater than 20 years. And it must have a peacetime role and a hunter-killer ability wartime role. Now, the peacetime role can mean a lot of things, but what it essentially means is intelligence gathering and covert insertion and recovery of special forces, things like that, as well as, some maritime issues, but mostly it's surveillance. All right, so May 1983 comes along and they finally agree to put out a proposal to 9 different diesel-electric sub manufacturers around the globe. Everybody from France to Germany to Italy submits their ideas of their latest technologies listed here. And the Americans down at the bottom, we don't really build diesel boats, but we have great computers, so we offer to build the combat control system for them, for whichever hull they decide. All right, then May 1985 comes along. You can see this process that began almost, 5-6 years ago. It's finally getting rolling. And that's just the way these procurement projects roll because they're all authorized and funded by government budgets that are planned years in advance. So first you decide to do something, then you decide to pay for it, then you get the money a year later, and then you begin doing it. And now we're at the review board selection. They have 9 proposals. They whittle them down to just the German proposal from the German companies and a Swedish company. And for the combat systems, it's the Rockwell American company and another American conglomerate, which is like a group of companies called Signal, put in a proposal too. The total budget in 1986 dollars is $4 billion for the whole thing, which is a lot of money back then. And they finally decide that they're going to go with Sweden's Type 471 design and the Rockwell combat system selected. The competition between Rockwell and Signal was almost just so that they could say that they had some competition to choose from, because ideally you want these manufacturers competing with price with each other to get the most out for your money. But honestly, Rockwell was going to be the company that made the combat system from the get-go. Okay, June 1987. We're building a new shipyard, boys, and we're doing it in Osborne, South Australia. In 1989, the shipyard finally goes live. In this period, some bow sections and the escape tower sections are already being constructed in Sweden. Now, normally, whenever you start a new class of submarine and you're buying the design from another country like Sweden or France or wherever it is, typically the very first hull, Hull 1, is built by that host country, in this case, Sweden. So Sweden kind of went ahead and started preparations for building the first hull. When Australia said, whoa, 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 what are you doing? We said it from the beginning, all submarines will be built in Australia. So even though it's your design, it's our build process. So they shipped the bow and escape tower sections down to Australia, where they were then finished at the ASC building. All right, so we got to name this new class. What are we going to name it? Well, Vice Admiral John A. Collins, very famous and successful naval officer. He was one of the first graduates of the Royal Australian Naval College to attain a flag rank, so good for him. He served in both world wars, so combat veteran two times over. He commanded the HMAS Sydney. He did deployments from the Mediterranean to the South Pacific, where he was wounded in the first recorded kamikaze attack. Kind of not something you want to be known for, but that was his claim to fame, among other things. But he had a very successful military career. He ended up being like Chief of Naval Operations, or the Australian version of that, and was a very high-ranking flag officer. So this is a well-deserved title for this submarine class, the Collins class. All right, so let's get building our Collins class. This is what we want to achieve. This is what the director and the budget all put out. This is what we're building here. So we're going to construct these submarines from 1990 until we're done, which ends up being 2003. They're going to be diesel electric. So a diesel electric submarine is kind of special. There's a common misconception out there on the internet that a diesel boat uses the diesel engines to directly turn the shaft of a submarine. And that's not really how it works. It's diesel electric for a reason. That means something. So the diesel engines charge a battery, and with the generator that charges the battery, also sends power, electricity, to a motor, a DC motor, an electric motor that then turns the shaft. So the diesel goes to a generator, which goes to a motor, which goes to the shaft. That's the power path of a diesel electric submarine. All right, we're going to displace 3,100 tons. It's going to be 77 meters long, 7 meters wide. The diesel engines are going to be made by the Garden Island Hedemora. It's an 18-cylinder diesel engine. It's really big, and there's 3 of them. And also we have the diesel generators made by Jumont Schneider, and they each produce 1,400 kilowatts. And those are each directly connected to the diesel engine. So diesel engine shaft turns the shaft of the diesel generator, So it's a diesel generator. Anyway, continuing on. The Collins class does have a single shaft. It has a 7-bladed propeller from day one, and we'll get into that in the next slide. They do have an EPM, so that's that emergency propulsion motor that drops down hydraulically and can, maintain like 3 to 4 knots in an emergency. But on the surface, it's a 10-knot submarine with 20 knots submerged. Again, you're faster underwater when you have that albacore-style hull, the rounded-style hull that all modern submarines have. The test depth is unclassified, so it's 600 feet. It's probably a little bit deeper than that, but that's the numbers that they gave us. The crew has gone through some changes. Originally, there was like 36 people on this submarine, which was not enough to man it. So they increased the crew in 2009 to 45 to 58, including female crewmen as well. So that's the range of crew you're going to see on these submarines. They have 11,000 yard mile range because they're fuel efficient, and the crew can stay on this diesel boat submarine submerged on station in operation for 70 days. That's over 2 months. That is an extremely long time for a diesel boat. And I kind of questioned this number until I realized we're talking about Australians here. And Australians are notoriously badass people. They live on a continent where nature is constantly trying to kill them. So maybe a 7-day cruise is kind of like a vacation for them, even on a diesel boat. So they have a 70-day crew endurance on this diesel thing. All right, let's get building, boys. February 1990, we lay down the keel, but you know what? We still don't have blueprints. We still don't have a completed design on what this thing is going to be, but we know how big the hull is, so we're going to start building the hulls, and then we'll figure it out as we go along. As you can imagine, that causes problems if you don't have a completed design before you start building these things. But they got a schedule to keep, and they're going to keep it. So Rockwell's combat system, that's the electronic brain of the submarine, is not finished whenever we started this. Key internal piping layouts are not approved. They are drawn, but they're not approved yet. So we can't really work on that just yet. But hell, we got hull pieces. We got that. Work continued until August 1993 when she was launched. Yeah, so obviously by 1993 they have everything in place, and she's launched, but not exactly everything. Some pieces of the hull during the launch ceremony were actually painted wood, painted timber, to make it appear as if the hull was complete when it actually was not. And they put it in the water anyway because they're Australians and they're badass as hell. So after the launch ceremony, she was unceremoniously taken back out of the water and finished in the following year. All right, construction problems continue. The welding techniques used in Sweden for the first section of the first hull did not meet the standards that ASC had set in the contract. And it gets really technical with how submarine welds work, but just know they just used a different welding method. And it wasn't per contract, so they had to rework a lot of welds in the first hull. Combat system software was not released to the hardware manufacturer. This is a big thing. So you got Rockwell building the computers for the Combat Information Center, and the software that's going to be running on the computers is proprietary to the software company that's also under contract, but they will not release the software development kit, the details of the software of how it works, to the hardware manufacturer. Well, the hardware manufacturer doesn't know how to implement the hardware without the software, and those two guys are not working together. So in steps Computer Sciences Corporation, corporation that I worked for briefly after the Navy, very good company. And they took over the software development. They're an American-based company, even though they are global, and they work well with the Rockwell company and get things moving along. And the other company that was building the software stays on board. They just have a lesser role in the program now. All right, so the hardware was designed in the 1980s because that's when the contract came out. It is now the 1990s. There is a huge computer revolution that continues today, but it began really in the 1980s. And was just rolling through the 1990s. So by the time they get to construction, the software that we're writing demands too much of the hardware. So they have to make a lot of compromises on the software side of things just to make it work on this now ancient, couple years old hardware. So system errors abound. Now, by the time they go into sea trials in 1994, not all of the computer software is even finished. Okay, approximately, and this is just a very rough estimate, 20% of the combat software is placeholder only. It's like it'll have a display. The display doesn't do anything, but it will in the future. You know, we're gonna add it in the future. And they go to sea trials in 1994 with incomplete software because that's the schedule, and they're sticking to it. Sea trials 1994. Well, boys, our submarines got some issues. The fuel tanks, which flood seawater as you use up the diesel fuel, which is a normal process. It's not special, but sometimes that seawater gets into the diesel engines, and that's really bad when that happens. If anybody knows how a diesel engine works, it works basically on compression, because it doesn't have a spark plug. So it needs to compress that diesel fuel to ignite it. Well, do you know what doesn't compress? Seawater. You get seawater into the combustion chamber of a diesel engine, you're going to have a bad time, because do you know what does compress? Cylinders. And pistons, and things break whenever you try to compress seawater in a compression chamber. The shaft seals, they were not aligned properly during construction, and this is huge. Over 260 gallons per minute were seen leaking into shaft alley of the boat during a deep dive, and they immediately had to come back up shallow again and address this misaligned shaft during sea trials. They did get that fixed or improved. They couldn't completely realign the shaft without taking the whole thing apart. But man, 260 gallons per minute, that's a lot of water, boys. I call that flooding, but they called it a leak. Anyway, propeller was redesigned to give more power. Oh, this is a big one. So they originally designed the propeller to be efficient and quiet and all that stuff, but it was too slow. It didn't meet the requirements in the contract. And this is a repeating theme here, is the contract submitted by Australia in the mid-1980s was basically for a nuclear submarine. Fast, quiet, long duration, high speeds for, long periods of time, on station for months. That's what nuclear submarines do. But they wanted it in a diesel boat. So they couldn't really meet these requirements. So the propeller couldn't meet the speed requirements, so they redesigned the propeller to have a more aggressive cut into the water. So, well, guess what? After a couple years of use, this is a little bit beyond sea trials, they began cracking. Now, this is where America stepped up, and we really help our allies a lot. So I want to give America some credit here. We helped them replace all of the 7-bladed screws on the Collins class after these cracks started appearing. Okay, originally the sail was too short and disrupted water flow, increasing turbulence that became cavitation. This is simply an engineering problem. They engineered the submarine to be so light so it could be fast and have high duration with low, a small weight capability, but they made the sail to body ratio too short. And so this caused a lot of turbulent flow as it went through the water submerged. As soon as that turbulence hits the screw, it turns it into cavitation at slow speeds. It's bad. It was really bad. So they had to lengthen the sail a little bit. You'll see that in some of the pictures. And they also have a little fairing on the front, kind of like the modern Seawolf in Virginia has. Okay, sound mounts were only effective at slow speeds. Those are the sound mounts on, underneath the diesel engines and generators. And as soon as they got up to a decent speed, I'll say 2/3 to pull a number out of my butt, they started, really vibrating and making a lot of noise. So the sound mounts were only effective when the ship was in a condition of like a patrol quiet, really slow speeds. The diesel engines had an additional problem separate from the sound mounts where they would resonate at certain speeds, maybe 8 knots, and then again at 16 knots, and then again, maybe at 20 knots. It was all a factor of the same speed. So they had to avoid these certain speeds because at said speed, and I'm going to say 8 knots, it would vibrate things to the boat to the point to where equipment was being damaged. Computer cards were being vibrated out of the slots, causing the computer to crash. It was really, really bad. So they had to fix that. Periscopes causing drag would shake, causing focus problems. So they're at periscope depth. They're only doing 4 or 5 knots. But anything above, say, a 5-knot bell, the periscope, because it did not have a fairing on it, and that's how you fix this, is by putting a fairing on it in Australia, it would vibrate. It would shake left and right, And so they couldn't really focus because the optics of an optical periscope versus a digital periscope, are very sensitive to motion. You need to isolate that thing. So they didn't put a fairing on the periscope and it vibrated. Surprise, surprise. That was kind of a dumb mistake. All right. July 1996, commissioned into service. Even with all of its problems, it's still capable. Still capable of going underway and doing its thing. You can really see the fairing on the front of the sail there, down by the sailor's feet. And if you look at the top of the sail, you see that extra little fairing that kind of extends out the top. Yeah, those are the changes that they made to keep that turbulent flow from going back and hitting the screw. Okay, weapons and sensors. She has 6 horizontally laid, left to right, 53-centimeter torpedo tubes, carrying up to 22 ad caps with the Seabass upgrade, and that's huge because that is the most capable ad cap in the American inventory at this time. You can see them there loading a exercise shot. That's why it's orange near the nose. It means that there's no warhead there. Make sure you shoot the exercise shots and not the real ones when you're in the war games, right? Now, she can shoot the harpoon missile and lay sea mines. Whether or not they do that or not, I have no idea. But they are capable of doing that. They do not have Tomahawk capability. Tomahawk capability was talked about, but was never funded and approved. So no land attack capability. Oh, and the excuse was, besides the money reason, was land attack was beyond the scope of the original contract thought up in the late 1970s, early 80s, which is right. Okay, they have the Thompson active passive bow sonar with a shore task towed array. And the shore task towed array literally comes out of a tube that goes along the back of the submarine. It's not very fancy, but it works. They have 2 periscopes, a radar, ESM, all that up in the sail, standard submarine stuff. Now, something that was new, and I didn't know that we shared with the Collins, but it kind of makes sense, is Link 11. Link 11 is data sharing with other platforms. So if you've got an American battle group, American satellites, American P3 Orions, out there with all their radars and sensors, and they have all these contacts that the Collins cannot see because they're hundreds of miles away. Well, they just raise up their radio antenna, connect to Link 11, data link, and they get the big picture. They can see everything. Everything that all the other sensors sees, this little Collins class can see as well. So it greatly improves situational awareness for everybody on board. History of service. So despite all these problems, the Australian sailors stepped up and just did an amazing job. This is a list of success. Starting in 1990, they inserted covert divers into East Timor for some real-world military action over there. That is not a war game. Then in 2000, she was successful in sinking warships in RIMPAC 2000 and submarines. In 2001, the following year, more war games, Operation Tandem Thrust. She sank 2 amphibious landing ships. Those are the big ships with all the Marines on them. So large loss of life there had that not been a war game. And then later that year, she went on to outdo herself by sinking a 688 class submarine. Now, this is a huge achievement because at the time, the 688 is like the best thing the United States Navy has. The Seawolf is coming online now. The Virginia's, being commissioned and getting up to speed. But the mainstay of the American Navy in 2001 is the 688. And so, and they're able to engage and sink it. And then in 2003, she not only does 1, but she sinks 2 688 class submarines and receives a commendation from the United States Navy as, hey, this is a very capable and quiet submarine that's able to sink 688 class submarines. So bravo to them. They took a program that had problems from design to construction to everything that was just going wrong. You put some Australian sailors on there and they make it work. This is just, I think the Australians should be very proud of their sailors and their Navy for what they've done with this program because they've made it very successful. Okay, in mid-2000s, a 10-year midlife upgrade begins. This is a 24-month period. They don't necessarily do all 24 months in a row, but they do at least 12 of the months in a dry dock. And then they also replace equipment. They did address the vibration problem I talked about, so that's improved. It's not necessarily gone, but it's a lot better. And also greatly improved performance, and that goes along with maintenance and things like that. So the Collins class of today is a lot better than the Collins class of 2001 that's sinking 688s and amphibious warships. So she's even more capable now and a little bit easier to maintain as well. And there are 6 of them serving the Australian Navy right now. And kudos to them. I think they're doing a great job. Keep it up. And they still haven't put a fairing on that periscope. If you want to fix that vibration problem with your optics, you want to put a fairing on that periscope, Australia. I'll give you that one for free. I'm Captain Jive Turkey, and if you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing, leaving a comment. Maybe even check out my Patreon where you can see these slides early. I post them days and days early now. So we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.